Avengers Endgame felt like a finish line, and in a lot of ways it was. Closed the story Marvel had been building since 2008. It killed off the two guys the whole universe was leaning on, and it gave everybody the cleanest goodbye a franchise this big has ever got. Tony Stark snaps his fingers, saves everything, and dies doing it. Steve Rogers finally gets his dance. Roll credit, wipe your tears, go home. But here's the thing, guys. That finish line was also a massive problem, because the second the credits rolled, Marvel was standing there without Iron Man, without the original Captain America, without Black Widow, and with a franchise that had just gotten the emotional payoff of a lifetime. And they still had to keep going. The next big bad was always going to be Doctor Doom and the Incursions and everything we now call Doomsday, but to get from that funeral to that war, Marvel basically had to rebuild the entire board from scratch. So this is the whole story. Endgame to Avengers Doomsday, every phase, every messy stretch, every quiet step, and how all of it is finally slamming into one giant collision. Let's get into it. So, start with the damage, because Endgame does not end clean, and that actually matters. Tony snaps away Thanos and his magical space rocks that dusted come home. Everybody cheers. But think about what actually happened. Half of all life was gone for 5 years. The people who survived rebuilt their entire lives around that absence. Governments adjusted, cities shrank, and then in one instant, everybody comes flooding back like, hey, what's up? I'm back. Where's my apartment? You know, that's chaos. That's not a happy ending. That's a logistics nightmare with superheroes on top. And that is the exact reason Marvel could not just cut to another Thanos level villain and pretend the board was still set. The board was wrecked. Half the pieces were missing. The emotional center was gone. And before Marvel could build anything new, it had to deal with the wreckage first.
For me, create a new one, teeming with life, that knows not what it has lost, but only what it has been given.
Which is basically what all of Phase 4 turned out to be. And Phase 4 is where a lot of people checked out. So let me actually defend it for a second, because underneath the mess, almost every one of these projects was quietly, doing a job. The first job was grief. WandaVision drops us into Wanda basically having a mental breakdown so massive she rewrites an entire town into a sitcom to avoid feeling the loss of vision. And yeah, it's weird and slow and full of ad breaks, but it does two huge things. It turns Wanda into the Scarlet Witch, one of the most powerful beings in the whole universe. And it plants the idea that grief plus reality warping power is a genuinely dangerous combination. Hold on to that, because it pays off later in the worst way possible. Then Falcon and the Winter Soldier picks up another loose end, the shield. Steve handed it off to Sam, but the show is really about whether America is even willing to accept a black Captain America, and what it costs Sam to take the Matt mantle for real. By the end, Sam is Captain America, no super soldier serum, just the shield and the responsibility. And that quietly sets up an entire corner of the future Earthside team.
I'll do my best.
Same with Hawkeye, which passes the bow to Kate Bishop and pulls Kingpin into the picture. And Miss Marvel, which introduces Kamala Khan, gives us a brand new generational hero and drops the very first real hint that mutants exist in this universe. None of these felt like event television at the time. None of them were adding lanes Marvel would merge into the highway later. And there's a whole pile of smaller street level and cosmic adjacent stuff running underneath all that too. The stuff people really love to call filler. Real quick, guys, that Doctor Doom reveal is exactly why this channel exists. Digging up the stuff Marvel is quietly planting before anybody else connects the dots. If that ever got you even a little light, go ahead and hit subscribe, drop a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown before Doomsday actually drops. Alright, let's keep going, because it only gets bigger from here. Moon Knight brings Egyptian gods and a genuinely unhinged mental health story into the mix, and quietly proves the MCU can do a self-contained horror-ish thriller with almost no ties to anything. She-Hulk is, Marvel goofing off, breaking the fourth wall, even poking fun at itself, and it sneaks in the return of Abomination and...
So I'm clearly nailing it at all these things.
Daredevil in a way that mattered to us, and yeah, that one mostly landed with a thud, but even it is technically moving pieces, right? You know? Showing the world getting more infiltrated, more unstable, less sure who's actually human. Not every one of these is a winner, guys. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend Secret Invasion is a banger, but that's kind of the nature of this era. Marvel was, you know, throwing a lot at the wall, and some of it stuck and some of it slid right off, and you had to sort of squint to see the shape of the plan underneath. But the single most important thing to happen in this whole stretch, the domino that starts every other domino, is Loki. Because Loki takes us out of the normal MCU entirely and into the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, the bureaucratic space cops who keep one single timeline running and prune anything that steps out of line. And at the start of that first season, Loki and Sylvie reach the man behind it all. He who remains, a variant of Kang the Conqueror. He gives them a choice. Keep the timeline controlled and safe, or kill me and let it all branch. Sylvie kills him, and in that one moment, the multiverse cracks wide open. That is the true starting gun for everything that comes next. Every incursion, every variant, every reality-bending problem for the MCU is dealing with on the road to Doomsday. It all traces back to that one stab wound at the end of Loki. And once the multiverse is loose, Marvel starts using it everywhere. Spider-Man No Way Home is the first time it really smashes into the main story, and it is genuinely one of the bangers. No argument. Peter's identity gets exposed. He begs Strange to fix it. The spell breaks, and suddenly the doors between universes are open. Villains pour in. Two other Spider-Men pour in. Toby and Andrew shake hands with Tom on screen, and the entire internet loses its mind. But look past the nostalgia and look at what the movie actually does to the board. It confirms the multiverse is not just some TVA backroom concept anymore. It is now a thing that can reach into the main universe and rip it apart. And it ends with Peter completely erased from everyone's memory. Alone, broke, starting over from zero. Remember that too, because Marvel is very much done with lonely Peter Parker. And I want to be clear about why No Way Home matters beyond the goosebumps, because it's easy to just call it a nostalgia bomb and move on. What that movie really did was teach the entire mainstream audience, not just the diehards, how every multiverse works and why it's dangerous. Regular moviegoers that never watched Loki suddenly understood that the other universes exist, that pulling from them has consequences, and that messing with the walls between realities can cost you everything. It's the biggest movie of the whole stretch, and Marvel used that spotlight to plant the exact idea it needed everyone to have before Doomsday, that it is not an accident, that is Marvel using its most popular character to do homework for the crossover, and getting $1 billion for it while they're at. Then, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness takes that idea and runs straight into a wall with it, and, you know, this is where WandaVision's setup comes due. Wanda, still broken from losing her kids, turns full villain, hunting a girl named America Chavez, who can punch holes between universes. Strange universe hops. We get the Illuminati, this big council of alternate heroes, and Wanda just walks in and slaughters them one by one. It is brutal, it is unhinged, and it introduces the single scariest concept in the road to Doomsday Incursions. When two universes touch, one of them dies. Sit with that. The whole engine of the next crossover, the reason Doomsday is a threat and not just another team up, is right here. Two realities collide, one gets deleted, Wanda ends the movie taking herself off the board. But the incursion idea stayed, and it is a loaded gun sitting on the table for the rest of the saga. Now, around all of this, Marvel is also expanding the actual map, and this is the part people call filler, even though it is really just world building. Shang-Chi introduces a major new hero, brings the 10 rings fully into focus after years of them being background lore, and ends with the rings sending out a mysterious signal that Marvel still hasn't fully cashed in.
What is it?
A beacon.
We're sending a message.
Eternals, you know, love it or hate it. It adds celestial scale lore to the universe and leaves a dead celestial, Tiamat, sticking halfway out of the ocean, which is way more important than people give it credit for. Black Panther, Wakanda forever! And yes, I'm doing the arms cross salute right now, and so should you, has to deal with the real loss of Chadwick Boseman. So it hands the mantle to Shuri, and more importantly, for the board. Introduces Namor and Talokan, a whole second hidden super nation with its own history and its own reasons to distrust the surface world. Suddenly, Wakanda isn't the only isolated superpower on the map. Throw in Thor, Love and Thunder, the Guardians Holiday Special, Werewolf by Night, and Moon Knight, and the pattern is clear. Some of these barely move the plot, sure, but every single one is Marvel widening the universe, so there are more pieces to throw at the wall when the big collision finally comes. And in the middle of all that expansion, Marvel also gave us one of the best things it has made in years, and I need to give it flowers. Guardian of the Galaxy Volume 3. Because while everyone was busy complaining that the post-Endgame MCU had no heart, James Gunn quietly dropped this movie with the most heart in the entire saga. Rocket's backstory, the whole thing with the experiments, the animals, Lila, it is genuinely one of the most devastating stretches of any Marvel project, and it reminds you that this universe can still absolutely wreck you emotionally when it wants you to. And by the end, the team splits up. Everybody goes their own way, which matters for the board because it means one of the founding teams of the MCU is now scattered, and that's more free pieces floating around the map for the next big story to grab. Same energy as Thor Love and Thunder in a way, and even if that one was way more divisive, it keeps Thor moving, gives him a kid, sets him up as a wanderer who could show up anywhere. Marvel spent this whole stretch making sure that when Doomsday calls, there are heroes all over the board, unattached, available, and carrying real emotional weight from the stories they just went through. Okay, so that's the rebuild and the expansion. Now we hit the phase that was supposed to tie it all together, the Kang era, and this is where the story gets genuinely complicated, both on screen and off. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was built to be the big villain reveal. This was Marvel formally announcing your next Thanos. Kang the Conqueror, a time-traveling conqueror who exists in infinite variants across infinite reality. And the movie ends by showing us the Council of Kang, thousands of him, all plotting on paper. That is a terrifying setup. A villain that is not one guy, but an entire multiversal army of the same guy. The whole saga was literally going to be named after him. Loki Season 2 then goes and stabilizes the multiverse, with Loki sacrificing himself to sit on the throne and hold the branching timelines together like a living framework, which is honestly one of the most underrated hero endings in the whole MCU. The Marvels ties Kamala, Monica, and Carol together, cracks open a hole in reality, and even teases Monica ending up in a universe that sure looks like the X-Men's. Every piece is pointing at Kang War. And underneath that main Kang push, Marvel keeps building out the street level and Mystic Corner too, which is where a lot of the future team is actually hiding. Echo pulls Maya Lopez out of Hawkeye and reconnects her to Kingpin, keeping that gritty New York underworld alive. Agatha all along carries Wanda's magic thread forward, digs deeper into witchcraft and the darker side of the MCU's power system, and quietly keeps a young Billy Maximoff in play. And if you know your comics, you know exactly how big that kid can get. Then you have Daredevil Born Again, bringing Matt Murdock back full time and putting Kingpin in a position of real political power in New York, which is basically Marvel rebuilding a whole street-level defenders bench for later. Ironheart hands the Iron Man legacy to Riri Williams and mixes in actual magic through Mephisto, of all people, which is a name that carries a lot of weight for what could come after Doomsday. None of these are the main event. All of them are Marvel making sure that when the dust settles, there's a deep bench of younger heroes ready to carry the universe forward. That's the board being stockpiled, not just cleared. Whew, I had a hard time saying that. And then, in the real world, everything changed, and Marvel had to make the boldest pivot in its history. For a bunch of reasons, Kang was out, and instead of quietly recasting and limping forward, Marvel did something absolutely nobody expected. They brought back Robert Downey Jr., the actual face of this universe, the guy whose death started this whole rebuild, and they cast him as Dr. Doom. Let that sink in for a second. The emotional core that Endgame ripped out is coming back, but as the villain. That is not a patch job, guys. That is a statement. Marvel basically looked at the messy Kang situation and decided to skip straight to the biggest, most iconic threat in Marvel Comics, and to wear the face of the character we love most while doing Dr. Doom, played by the ghost of Iron Man. Whatever you think of the phase up to this point, that swing is undeniable, and think about the emotional trick it's pulling. The single most painful loss in the universe was Tony Stark. That death is the wound soon the whole post-Endgame era has been limping away from. So Marvel takes that exact face, the one that makes the whole audience feel something, that the second it appears, and puts it on the most dangerous villain in Marvel history. Every time Doom takes off that mask, you are going to feel Tony, and you are going to feel wrong about feeling Tony. And that tension is going to do half the work of the movie before Doom even opened his mouth. That is not a casting gimmick, that is Marvel weaponizing its own history against you. And honestly, after everything, that is the kind of bold, slightly insane swing that made me trust the plan again. So from there, the whole MCU shifts into what I can only call Runaway mode. Every project stops feeling like a side quest and starts feeling like it is being dragged towards the same collision point. Deadpool and Wolverine is the fun, chaotic bridge and does a ton of quiet work. You know, it formally folds the old Fox X-Men universe into the mix. It takes us into the void at the end of the time where forgotten franchises go to die. It leans hard on the TVA and the multiversal rules Loki set up, and it basically tells the audience, hey, all that old material you thought was dead, the Fox Mutants, the past franchises, you know, it's all on the table now. It's a party movie with a serious job, which is preparing you to accept that anyone from any universe can show up in that crossover. And think about how clever that actually is. For years, fans have been begging for the Fox Mutants, the old X-Men, for all these characters Marvel didn't even have the rights to when this universe started. Deadpool and Wolverine is the moment Marvel basically walks up to the audience and goes, yeah, all of that? Oh, it counts now. It's canon. It's part of the map. Once you accept that, there is no longer any such thing as a character who can't appear. Wolverine can stand next to Captain America. A variant of everyone can walk through a door. That is massive psychological shift for the audience. And Marvel needs to make that shift before Doomsday, because Doomsday only hits as hard as it does if you actually believe the walls between universes are gone. Then Marvel starts filming up the Earth side team, because if old Avengers are gone, somebody has to be standing there when Doom arrives. Captain America Brave New World puts Sam fully in the driver's seat as Cap, brings back Thaddeus Ross, now president, now also a giant red Hulk, and drags the dead Celestial from Eternals back into the plot as a mountain of adamantium that every world power wants a piece of. Thunderbolts then takes a pile of broken anti-heroes and damaged people, Yelena, Bucky, Walker, Ghost, Red Guardian, and forges them into a scrappy, dysfunctional replacement team. One that literally ends by calling themselves the New Avengers. That's the point, right there. This is not the Avengers are back. This is a shakier, patched together version of a team held together by pressure and, purely necessity, which is exactly the kind of fragile Earth Marvel wants standing in the way when the real threat lands. And then the scale jumps again, because the Fantastic Four finally arrive. Fantastic Four First Steps drops Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben into the MCU as Marvel's first family, and it does not ease them in. It puts them a planet-eating cosmic god named Galactus on the screen basically immediately. That is a huge deal for the board, because it means the MCU is now officially playing in the Fantastic Four sandbox, where genius-level science, cosmic-level threats, and reality-bending stakes are just the normal Tuesday. And it brings in Franklin Richards, Reed, and Sue's kid, who in the comics is one of the most powerful beings in all of existence, a reality-warping mutant who can basically remake universes. You do not introduce a character like that unless you plan to point him at something enormous. Franklin belongs to the exact power tier that makes an event like Doomsday make sense. And it's worth saying, the Fantastic Four have always been Dr. Doom's people. In the comics, Doom is their villain first, their rival, their dark mirror, the guy obsessed with Reed Richards. So the second Marvel brings the Fantastic Four in and announces Doom as the big bad in the very next Avengers movie, longtime fans immediately understood what was happening. Marvel wasn't just adding a family, it was importing that one relationship that makes Doom truly terrifying and personal. That's why First Steps isn't a side story, it's basically Doom's origin door swinging open, even if the man himself is saving his entrance for the crossover. And right alongside the cosmic stuff, Spider-Man Brand New Day quietly resets Peter for the collision. Marvel's own trailer frames it as an entirely new chapter 4 years after No Way Home, with Peter completely alone, broke, and erased from the lives of everyone he loves, which honestly is peak Spider-Man suffering and exactly what the fans asked for. are, and that matters because it means when the multiverse comes crashing down, Peter is a clean slate, unattached with everything to lose all over again. Marvel is lining him up to be one of the most emotional anchors of a story that badly needs one. And here's what really sells how big Doomsday is trying to be. Just look at who Marvel says is showing up. This isn't a normal team-up cast. You've got the new generation Avengers, you've got the Fantastic Four fresh off their own movie, you've got Thunderbolts, you've got Shang-Chi and the Wakandans, and then out of nowhere, you got the return of the original Fox X-Men, the actual legacy actors people grew up with, walking back onto the board decades later. That is the whole point of spending years setting up the multiverse and the incursions and folding in the Fox material through Deadpool and Wolverine. It was also that when Doom finally makes his move, Marvel can pull heroes and faces from every version of these characters we've ever seen and then put them in one room. It's the kind of impossible crossover that only works if you spend a whole decade quietly earning it. And love it or hate it, that is exactly what this movie post-Endgame run has been doing. Every weird show, every underrated movie, every dead celestial and mysterious ring signal was a deposit. And Doomsday is where Marvel finally tries to cash all of it at once. So, put the whole picture together and look at what Marvel actually did. After Endgame, they replaced the old heroes. Sam becomes Cap, Shuri becomes Black Panther, Kate and Kamala and Yelena break a whole new generation setup. They expanded the map to lock on 10 rings, the Eternals and their Celestials, the Cosmic Fantastic Four corner. They crack the multiverse wide open. From Loki to No Way Home to the Incursions and Multiverse of Madness, and when their original Endgame villain fall apart, they pivoted to the biggest name they had and put the most beloved face in the franchise behind the mask. Every single one of those lanes, the new heroes, the expanded map, the broken multiverse, the incursion threat is now merging into one road, and the name of the place they all crash is Avengers Doomsday. So, what actually is Doomsday shaping up to be? Based on everything Marvel has put on the table, it is the moment all of it collides at once. You have Doctor Doom wearing the face of Iron Man as the central threat. You have the incursions, universes smashing into each other, one dying every time they touch, which finally explains why this is not just another team up, but a genuine last stand. You have the X-Men and the Mutants teased since Miss Marvel and folded in through Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, close enough to touch. You have the Fantastic Four and their cosmic reality-bending power set, and you have this shaky replacement version of the Avengers, the new Avengers, the Cap that isn't Steve, the heroes still figuring out if they even want to work together, forced to stand against the biggest threat the universe has ever produced. It is on purpose the messiest, most crowded, highest stakes setup Marvel has ever built, and they built it in one quiet project at a time while everyone was busy arguing whether the face was any good. Which brings me to the point of this whole thing. All that stuff people wrote off as filler, all the shows nobody finished, all the movies that felt disconnected, and that Marvel was loading on the board, every hidden nation, every hero, every multiverse rule, every dead celestial and mysterious signal and reality warping kid. They were all pieces being set down for a game that only makes sense now that you can see the whole thing at once. The post-Endgame MCU was never going to be clean. How could it be? Of course, the years after felt like the studio scrambling to keep a giant machine running without the parts that made it feel stable. Some of the stretch genuinely was messy, but y'all cannot tell me we didn't get some absolute bangers along the way. And you cannot tell me it wasn't building to, at least something. So, my conclusion, Endgame to Doomsday, is really one long story about rebuilding after a loss you're not supposed to survive. Marvel lost Iron Man, Cap, Black Widow, lost the whole emotional foundation, and then spent years replacing the heroes, widening the universe, breaking open the multiverse, and quietly walking every one of those lanes towards the same collision. And now that the Fantastic Four are here, the mutants are basically at the door. The incursions are ticking, and Doctor Doom is on the way wearing the most important face in the entire franchise. The MCU finally feels like it is building towards one gigantic event for the first time since 2019. Spider-Man Brand New Day went and did way more for the board than anybody expected from a street-level movie, because now that it's out, look at what it actually put on the table. 4 years after No Way Home, Peter is alone, broke and erased. Exactly the clean slate setup we talked about. And the film spends its runtime leveling him up in ways that matter for the crossover. his powers start evolving on their own. The movie plays it like a second puberty for this spider DNA. Sharper senses, organic webbing, the works. And Peter is so freaked out by it, he builds himself a universal inhibitor chip, an actual off switch for superpowers. Any superpowers. Built off the same tech that controlled Doc Ock's arms, and wears it on his own neck. Sit with that for a second, because a device that can switch off any powered person in the universe is now canon. Built by a broke kid in the Punisher's hideout, and you do not put a gadget like that on the board 8 months before a war with Doctor Doom unless somebody plans to pick it up. And then there's a headline: Jean Grey, an Omega-level telepath. In the main universe, on-screen mind-controlling half the cast, shrugging off Peter's chip and telling him some things are not meant to be suppressed before the film ends, with Peter pulling the chip out and finally coexisting with the spider side of himself. Between her, the Punisher showing up, and a Gamma-level event banner fight, Brand New Day quietly turned a Spider-Man movie into a board state update. Mutants are not teased anymore. They are here. And Marvel's designated emotional anchor just walked out of his loneliest movie stronger, stranger, and with nothing left for Doomsday to take from him. Still, that is exactly the hero you place at the center of a story where everyone else still has everything to lose. The finish line became a starting line. And honestly, I am so hyped to see where it all lands. So, guys, if you made it this far, let me know down in the comments which project after Endgame actually made sense to you, and which one you think Marvel still needs to pay off before Doomsday. With that said, thank you for watching, thank you for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one. And bye-bye.